Welcome to The Writer Reads Chronicles of a Dark God, Book 2, Dark Gods Rise, Chapter 25, Kelhadria and the Villagers. As while Shira watched the villagers free their friends from the cages, and while Reuven was still alive and whole, Raomar raced toward the sound of battle coming from the building in which Brianda was held. Grunwald kept the pace beside him, and an exhausted ghost rested in the shelter of the forest's edge, with Alessia and her apprentices keeping watch. The child's desperate plea to Anshul reached his ears as he left, taking the open space between the trees and the ruin in long, silent strides. Please, my lady, cover my master in the dark, and grant his blades your blessing. Let him be in time to reach her. Please. The whisper repeated itself, and Raomar pushed himself to move faster, eyeing the cellar window through which she'd exited. It wasn't hard to see it wasn't an option. He didn't try to fit through the bars, but leapt through a gap a ground floor window used to fill. No one leapt to greet him, and he landed full-footed and looked for stairs. Seeing a doorway to the left, he pivoted and moved swiftly toward it. The corridor was empty, save for the bodies of two raiders who hadn't retreated fast enough. Both had long feathered arrows protruding from their torsos. Neither moved. Raomar put his blade through the second one, hearing the crunch as Grunwald did the same for the first. Both of them had been on battlefields where the dead had risen to attack them from behind. Now neither would move again. They kept moving, turning into the stairwell located halfway along the hall. Sounds of fighting came from below, and Grunwald tapped him on the shoulder as they reached the foot of the stairs. I lead, he said, and it was not a suggestion. Raomar stepped aside to let him pass. It took all his willpower not to surge ahead, but this was Grunwald's task, to protect him and to forge a path. There's only one way she could have gone, the barbarian muttered, pivoting left to take the corridor. From the other end of it came the clash of blades and cries of desperate and dying men. They picked up speed until they reached the first door. Glancing through, Raomar saw the empty thongs and shackles on the floor. A second glance showed the rack of torture tools with the empty spaces where items had been taken. Apprehension bloomed in his chest, and Raomar signaled for Grunwald to keep going. The Northman unslung his axe and continued down the corridor without a word. They encountered the first huntsmen and villagers at the corner, and they parted to give the barbarian room to pass. Grunwald met their uncertain looks with a stern glare. Lady Kelhadria sent for us, he said, and silent fingers pointed him toward the room on the right. Raomar stayed close to the barbarian, kept his hood pulled down around his face. Glad he'd pulled gloves over his hands, he kept his blade low and followed Grunwald's solid back. The scent of magic swirled around them, and Raomar laid a hand on Grunwald's shirt. The barbarian didn't flinch. I'm all right, he said. Besides, it's fading. The barbarian was right. Raomar could feel it. He pushed forward, darting around Grunwald just as someone cried out in alarm. From across the room came the smell of soot and a flurry of movement. A raider raced into the portal as the swordsman facing him pivoted toward the hearth. The silver light of the portal pulsed, and a woman's voice raised the alarm. Stay back, Kelhadria ordered, then grab him, Havnor. Another cry followed, then the magic suddenly flared in power and was gone. Raomar moved past Grunwald in time to see one of the village guards haul another man free of the rapidly fading silver. The magic shimmered, parting just enough for the man to be dragged clear, before it vanished. Silence fell as those who'd seen it tried to work out exactly what it was they'd witnessed. But Raomar's gaze returned to the fireplace. He was in time to see the swordsman face off against a small but familiar figure. Brianda, Raomar breathed, seeing her draw the weapons at her belt. She took a step back to take her out of the swordsman's reach, only to catch her heel and fall back. The swordsman darted forward, and so did he. No, he cried, drawing the nearest eyes toward him as he raced toward her. Brianda! Someone clawed at his cloak. Grunwald, trying to draw him back, but he'd moved beyond the barbarian's grip. Brianda! He pushed forward again, sure he'd heard the crack of her head on the brickwork, and terrified the swordsman hadn't stayed his blades in time, or at all. In the quiet that followed, Raomar pushed himself through the crowd and knelt at her side. Seeing the pallor of her skin, he whisked off his cloak and laid it over her. Easy, Briar. I'll ask the god to. He stopped as a blade swung in his direction. Another blade knocked it aside, and Raomar became aware of Grumel standing astride him. That was a foolish thing to do, my friend, the barbarian murmured. Ghost said her life flame was failing, Raomar retorted. He ran his hands over Brianda's head, feeling the injury there and seeing her flinch at his gentle touch. I'll need space to heal her, and herbs, bandages, and hot water, and. He let the words fade as a firm tread signaled the arrival of someone else. Judging from the way others shuffled out of their way, they were someone important, a fact confirmed moments later when Lady Kelhadria spoke. You were not mistaken, Northman, when you said your friends were an unfortunate colour. Raomar looked toward the voice, peering around Grumel's leg to recognize the woman who'd met the Northman on the ridge. Her green eyes held a flicker of lamplight, and her brown hair glittered with chestnut highlights. But the set of her jaw was just as determined, and her sword was still in its scabbard. That was promise enough, and he gave her a pleading look. I need water, my lady, and herbs that will heal, and my companion needs warmth and food when she wakes. I've little enough with which to pay you, but. He let his voice trail off, then rallied. Will you help? She pursed her lips, her brow furrowing as she looked at him. As she drew a breath to answer, there was a disturbance at the doorway, and Kelhadria turned her attention toward it. Her pensive look turned to joy when she saw who it was. Falcon! She exclaimed. You came! The forester eased his way through the villagers. They agreed to help, my lady. He gestured toward Brianda and came to kneel beside Raomar, forcing Grumwell to shift to give him room. She's paid dearly for her courage. He brushed a strand of hair from Brianda's face and gently removed the makeshift daggers from her hands, and raised his eyes to the lady. Is there naught you're willing to do, my lady? The woman blushed, and she pivoted abruptly away, addressing the men and women around her. You've heard what's been done for you, she cried. Go! Her hand stabbed out as she spoke. You three, fetch wood and build a fire in the dining hall upstairs, and you four, see what you can find of the raiders' supplies. We all need to eat, and it would be best to return to the village in daylight. She looked around the room, singling out more of her people. You two, you can cook? At an affirmative, she continued. Good, go and help them. Her eye travelled over the group. And you can fetch water. The rest of you, gather and stack the bodies and see what else you can do to be useful. We have wounded of our own that need tending. When the room was clear, she crossed to Raomar. He stooped and gathered Brianda into his arms, holding her against himself and following Kelhadria's every move with anxious eyes. The half-elf in his arms hung limply, her skin an unhealthy pallor, and a light sheen of sweat on her face. The clatter as Falcon righted one of the upturned beds made him flinch, and Kelhadria turned toward him. The forester caught her eye. We'll need a fire down here, he began, moving to the next bed and setting it on its feet. There are beds, and we should not carry her too far. He shot Raomar an apologetic look. Also, he added, it would comfort the men to know where the newcomers are. Kelhadria looked around the room, noting the extra bedrolls being rolled out about them, and the hearth being cleared, and the wood being carried in. She pursed her lips, taking in the attitude of those returning with what she'd asked, and then gave a brisk nod. It shall be so, she agreed, and we shall bring the worst of our own wounded down here as well. Falcon favoured her with a grim smile. That would be well, he told her, for he's a priest of Staravan and sworn to do his best to aid us. The lady crossed to Raomar, laying a hand on his arm and drawing him toward the first bed. Set her there, she instructed, and tell me your name. Raomar, he provided, doing as she bid and settling Brianda on the bed. It is an honour to meet you, she replied. He laid a hand over his heart. And I you, Lady Kelhadria, she answered, and I assure you I am no lady. Raomar frowned, kneeling beside Brianda so he could properly examine her wounds. But you are the lady of Criochole, he said. She ducked her head, blushing faintly. Clearing her throat, she lifted her face and looked him in the eye. I am not so much its lady as its keeper, she answered tartly, and Raomar remembered a not so distant night spent in a rival's cell, and a young man swearing he had to look after Kel. Dart had been right. The idea was laughable. Silence reigned as he stared at her, and she shifted uncomfortably. I keep it for my half brother Broderick, she said. He is the true lord of Criochole. Again there was silence, and this time it was Raomar who bowed his head, at a loss for what to say. He was saved from having to say anything when Grumwell spoke. And where is he? He joined the king's army to prove his loyalty, Kelhadria replied. They sent him to defend Dramanda in the far northwest. I know Dramanda, Grumwell put in. It is surrounded by forests and lies on the northern shore of the Lake of Fears. I didn't know it needed mercenaries to defend it. Kelhadria's mouth curled bitterly. A recent event, it seems, and Devrath's troops are the finest mercenaries in the world. My brother was one of the first recruits to be sent. And your father? Raomar asked. Where is he? Kelhadria's voice softened. He left Devrath some weeks ago. They went south until things calmed down and Broderick went to see them off. She sighed. It's a family matter. I understand, Raomar told her, not wanting to reveal he knew exactly what the matter was. Instead, he turned his mind to something more pressing. I need to find my apprentice, he said, accepting a light blanket from Falcon and draping it over Brianda. He pushed to his feet. Will you have someone stay with this one while I go and seek her out? Falcon moved to bar his way. You'll go nowhere, he stated quietly. I will go, and the barbarian, if he'll come. Grunwald stepped forward. I'll fetch her safely, he said. Will you need someone to watch you as you pray? Raomar sighed and shook his head. As much as he wanted to go and fetch Ghost himself, he knew what the others were trying to say. As much as he had helped the villagers, he was still Kavarag, and there were those in the village who had been hurt by others of his kind. I'll need no one, he stated, then looked at Kelhadria. Lady, is there anything I can do? She shook her head, then gestured toward Brianda's still form. Tend to your friend, she said. My wounded will be here soon enough, and I'll need you then. Our own priests have been forced into hiding by the king's men, and I'm not sure Ruraneth can bring them in time for those worst hurt. Raomar nodded and turned back to Brianda, carefully stripping her tunic and breeches. The marks on her chest and stomach kindled a slow burning rage, and then he turned her carefully onto her side and swore. Come, Falcon's voice came from behind him. We need to bring the wizardess and the apprentices. All the apprentices. Raomar drew the cover over Brianda and moved to the fire, lighting it with a simple spell that set the twigs afire and sent wisps of smoke curling around the logs. Before long, one of Kelhadria's people had brought a water-filled cauldron from the bandit's kitchen and settled it over the flame. Crossing back to Brianda, he set to work, looking up in surprise when someone set a bowl of hot water and some cloths beside him. Cleaning the wounds took more time, and he was barely done when Falcon and Grunwald returned. They brought an armful of wood each, and were trailed by Alessia and Sindra carrying bundles of herbs. The others are searching the woods for more, Alessia told him, but it's difficult to tell one plant from another in the lamplight. That I can help you with, Grunwald said, and took the wizard-lit stone from its pouch. Handing it to Alessia, he added, This will help you see clearly. With a grateful smile, the wizardess set her bundle of herbs on a table set up beside the hearth, and accepted the stone. Thank you, Grunwald. I'll see it's returned to you. Grunwald nodded and returned to arranging the firewood. When he was done, he turned back to Raomar. What now? He asked. Find Ghost and Zareen, Raomar ordered. I need to see them both safe. One of the villagers spoke up. This Zareen, he said. She wouldn't be the one who's taken a shine to our Ruraneth. The shapeshifter? Raomar asked, continuing when he received a nod. Aye, she's the one. The man ducked his head, looking very much like he wished he hadn't spoken. And what of her? Raomar asked, trying to keep his voice mild. Relief flooded the man's face, and he stumbled over his reply. Well, it's just she's a better cook than we have, the man said. And she was in the kitchens last I saw, and I didn't think it was a good idea to disturb her, is all. And she's in no danger? Raomar asked. No, sir, she's safe as a houses, he declared, knowing her herbs and seasoning and how to put a stew or roast together on short notice. Good for morale, she is. As long as she's kept safe, Raomar told him, and he nodded rapidly. Oh, aye, sir, girl like that, good in the kitchen and all, safe as houses, sir. He swallowed nervously. And the other one, sir? She appears to be an elven child, Raomar told him, save that her skin is as mottled as my own and her eyes are as amber as mine. The man shook his head. Then we haven't seen her, he replied, but I'll go looking for her if you like. Raomar shook his head. No, he answered, looking around until his gaze rested on the barbarian. I'll send Grumwell to find her. He frowned. Although I don't know why you didn't find her before. She moved, Grumwell said, and I thought it better to bring the others to shelter. But she was exhausted, Raomar protested. And if she didn't want to be found, no one will find her, the barbarian told him. True enough, Raomar replied, returning to Branda's wounds. I'll need salve. Covering her carefully once the wounds were clean, he moved to the table and its herbs, relieved to find what he needed to create a healing paste. I'll go with Grumwell, Alessia said, delivering another armful of herbs and returning the stone. We've brought everyone into shelter, she reported. It's late, and not everything in the Criochole is benign. The forester, tending the fire, snorted. There's nothing benign about the Criochole, he told them, and Grunwell hefted his axe in answer. We'll find her, he assured them, and left, the fire-haired wizardess trailing him and gesturing for her apprentice to remain. Help Raomar with the injured, she ordered. Falcon brought more water for the cauldron and stoked the fire, then crossed to Raomar to help him sort the newly brought herbs. The two men exchanged glances and sighed. It was, they knew, going to be a very long night.